If you compare images of Akhenaten with other depictions of pharaohs, you'll notice that Akhenaten looks very different.
What if the most famous face in ancient history was hiding a secret its own family tried to bury for 3,000 years? In 2010, a team of Egyptian and European scientists sealed themselves inside a laboratory in Cairo with 11 mummies, a battery of DNA sequencers, and a single question that had haunted Egyptologists since the 19th century. Who was really buried in tomb KV55, and what did that answer mean for the boy king whose golden mask has become the symbol of an entire civilization? When the results came back, they didn't just identify a body. They exposed a pattern of royal marriage so extreme, and a genetic price so brutal, that it rewrote everything historians thought they understood about the pharaoh Akhenaten and his son, Tutankhamun. To understand why this discovery landed like a thunderclap, you have to go back to the art itself, because the story didn't begin in a genetics lab. It began on the walls of a city that shouldn't have existed. Around 1353 BCE, a pharaoh named Amenhotep IV did something no Egyptian king had done in 2,000 years of unbroken tradition. He turned his back on Ammonius, the state god whose priesthood controlled enormous wealth and land across Egypt, and declared that only one god mattered, the Aten, the visible disk of the sun. He changed his own name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, abandoned the ancient capital of Thebes, and built an entirely new city from bare desert at a site now called Amarna. Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves, in his book, Akhenaten, Egypt's False Prophet, describes this as one of the most radical religious ruptures in the ancient world, a king attempting to collapse a complex, layered pantheon into a single relationship between himself, his family, and the sun. But it wasn't only the theology that broke with tradition. It was the way Akhenaten chose to be shown. For 2 millennia, Egyptian kings had been carved as idealized, muscular, eternally youthful gods on earth. Akhenaten ordered his artists to do something almost unthinkable, depict him with an elongated skull, a sagging belly, wide hips, thin arms, and a face with heavy-lidded eyes and an unusually long jaw. His daughters were shown with the same stretched, unusual proportions. Nefertiti appears beside him with comparable features. For decades, Egyptologists debated furiously over what this meant. Was it religious symbolism, a way of showing the king as a fused, androgynous embodiment of creation itself? Was it simply a new artistic style, a rejection of old convention for its own sake? Or was something happening in the actual bodies of the royal family that the art was quietly documenting? The debate might have stayed a matter of academic speculation forever, if not for a badly damaged burial discovered decades earlier in the Valley of the Kings. In 1907, English archaeologist Edward Ayrton, working for the American lawyer and excavator Theodore Davis, uncovered a small, hastily sealed tomb now catalogued as KV55. Inside was a single coffin, its royal nameplates deliberately hacked away, its golden face torn from the mask, and a skeleton whose identity has been argued over for more than a century. Some early researchers thought the bones belonged to a woman. Others insisted it was Akhenaten himself. Still others proposed a lesser-known figure named Smenkhare. The skull was long. The frame was slender. And whoever had sealed that coffin seemed determined that history would forget the man inside it. For nearly 100 years, that argument went nowhere, because there was no way to settle it beyond guesswork and measuring calipers. Then, in the mid-2000s, the equipment finally existed to ask the bones themselves. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, under Secretary-General Zahi Hawass, authorized what would become the most ambitious genetic study ever attempted on Egyptian royal mummies. The project brought together Egyptian geneticist Yehia Zakaria Gad, radiologist Ashraf Salim, and German researchers Carsten Pusch and Albert Zink from the University of Tübingen, alongside a wider team working out of the National Research Center in Cairo and the Egyptian Museum. Their goal was to sequence DNA from 11 mummies connected to the 18th dynasty, use CT scanning to map every bone in unprecedented detail, and finally answer 2 entangled questions: who fathered Tutankhamun, and why did that pharaoh's body show so much evidence of disease? The methodology had to survive intense scrutiny before anyone would trust the results, because ancient DNA is notoriously fragile, and Egypt's heat has destroyed genetic material in countless other mummies. The team worked exclusively with samples taken from teeth and dense long bones, where DNA is best protected from degradation. They analyzed mitochondrial DNA, which passes only from mother to child, Y chromosome markers, which trace an unbroken male line from father to son, and a panel of autosomal short tandem repeats used in modern paternity and forensic testing. Every result was checked against modern Egyptian reference populations and independently repeated to rule out contamination. When the findings were finally published in 2010 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, under the title Ancestry and Pathology in King Tutankhamun's Family, they carried the full weight of peer review behind them, which is exactly why the conclusions could not be dismissed as speculation. The genetic chain that emerged was unambiguous. The mummy from KV-55 and a previously unidentified female mummy known only as the Younger Lady, found in a side chamber of tomb KV-35, were confirmed as the biological parents of Tutankhamun. That alone would have been a major discovery, finally closing a 100-year mystery about the boy king's parentage. But the deeper finding was the one that stunned even the researchers who had spent years preparing for it. The KV-55 individual and the Younger Lady shared not just a father, but a mother as well. They were full siblings. Tutankhamun, the pharaoh whose burial mask has become perhaps the single most recognizable artifact from the ancient world, was the child of a brother and a sister. This was not, historians quickly pointed out, an isolated scandal. It was policy. Egyptologist Aidan Dodson, in his research on 18th dynasty royal genealogy, has written extensively about how Egypt's kings routinely married close relatives, including full and half-siblings, precisely because royal blood was considered a physical channel for divine order. A sister born of the same king and queen carried, in the theology of the period, a purity that no outside marriage could offer. It wasn't a private indulgence hidden from public life. Temple inscriptions and royal titulary openly celebrated these unions as sacred. The idea that inbreeding might carry a biological cost simply wasn't part of how the ancient Egyptians understood inheritance. They didn't have the concept of recessive genes. What they had was an unbroken conviction that keeping the bloodline contained was the only way to keep the kingdom safe. Modern genetics tells a very different story about what that containment actually does. Geneticists studying consanguinity have long established that when two unrelated people have a child, the chance of a serious recessive genetic disorder sits at roughly 2 to 3%. When the parents are full siblings, that risk jumps to somewhere near 25%, because both parents are far more likely to carry, and pass on, the exact same hidden mutations. Repeat that pattern across multiple generations, as the 18th dynasty did, and the odds don't reset each time. They compound. Harmful recessive traits that would normally stay diluted and invisible start meeting identical copies of themselves in every new royal child, and the results show up in the body. Which brings the story back to Tutankhamun's own bones, because the same 2010 study that untangled his parentage also put his skeleton through high-resolution CT scanning, and what it found matched the genetic risk almost perfectly. His left foot showed a clear case of clubfoot, a congenital deformity in which the foot is rotated and shortened from birth, making a normal walking gait essentially impossible without support. His right foot was missing a bone in the smallest toe, a congenital absence rather than damage from age or embalming. Scans also revealed patches of avascular necrosis in the bones of his foot, a condition in which bone tissue dies because its blood supply has failed, a finding some researchers, including radiologist Ashraf Salim, connected to Kolar disease, a bone disorder that typically appears in childhood. His spine showed mild curvature. Long-running debate over a cleft in his palate remains unresolved among specialists, but the foot pathology alone was severe enough that Hawass and his colleagues concluded the king likely needed assistance simply to stand. That conclusion gained an almost unbearable physical weight when set against what Howard Carter had already found in 1922, when he opened Tutankhamun's tomb for the first time in more than 3,000 years. Among the treasures catalogued from that excavation were over 100 canes and walking sticks, some plain, some elaborately decorated in gold and inlaid glass, several showing clear wear patterns consistent with regular use by a young man's hand. For decades those canes were catalogued as ceremonial symbols of pharaonic authority, ordinary grave goods buried with any king. The DNA and bone evidence gave them a second, much more human explanation. They may not have been symbols at all. They may have been mobility aids for a teenager whose own body had betrayed him from birth. The 2010 study went further still, extracting genetic material from Tutankhamun's femur that tested positive for Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite responsible for the deadliest form of malaria. Multiple strains were detected, suggesting repeated infections rather than a single fatal episode, and researchers proposed that a body already weakened by inherited disease may have had little capacity left to fight off a severe malarial infection near the end of his life. Tutankhamun died at around 19 years old, and while debate continues among Egyptologists over the exact cause of death, the combined picture painted by the 2010 team was of a young king whose short life was shaped, and very possibly shortened, by generations of decisions made long before he was born. And this is where Akhenaten's unusual portraiture finally connects to the genetics in a way that historians had argued about for a century without proof. If Akhenaten was, as most current scholarship holds, the KV55 individual or closely related to him, then the same recessive genetic load that produced Tutankhamun's clubfoot and fragile bones may have been present, in a different form, in his father as well. Some researchers, including craniofacial specialists who have studied CT data from the study, have proposed that Akhenaten's own skull shape falls within the range of natural human variation rather than requiring a rare syndrome to explain it, and that Amarna art may have exaggerated genuine physical traits for religious effect rather than inventing them outright. Others still favor medical explanations like Marfan syndrome or a pituitary disorder affecting growth. What nobody can dismiss anymore is the underlying genetic context the 2010 JAMA study revealed, a family that had been marrying within itself for generations, concentrating whatever hidden traits ran through its bloodline, whether or not every artistic distortion at Amarna maps directly onto a single named condition. Facial reconstruction work built on the CT scans of these mummies, carried out by teams including French forensic specialists and Egyptian researchers working with the Discovery Channel and National Geographic in the years following the JAMA publication, attempted to render these bone structures back into recognizable human faces for the first time since antiquity. The reconstructions didn't produce a monster or a myth. They produced a plausible human face, elongated in places, softer in others, but unmistakably a person rather than a caricature. That, in many ways, is the quiet emotional center of this entire story. For 3,000 years, a family obsessed with divine purity carved its private biology onto public temple walls without ever understanding what it was actually showing the world. Their priests and later dynasties tried to erase Akhenaten's name from king lists and smash his statues into rubble, not necessarily because they understood the genetics, but because his entire religious project had failed and needed to be forgotten. In doing so, they very nearly erased the evidence that could have explained what happened to his family, and to his son, in the first place. Tutankhamun's own story ended the 18th dynasty's direct male line. He left no surviving children, despite 2 documented stillborn daughters found buried in his tomb and confirmed through DNA testing to be his own offspring, likely with his half-sister and wife, Akhenaten, continuing the same pattern of close marriage into yet another generation. After his death, the throne passed first to the elderly official Ai, and then to the general Hormheb, neither of whom carried the royal bloodline that had once considered itself the only vessel fit to rule Egypt. An empire that had stretched from the Nile to the Euphrates, built by warrior kings like Thutmose III and consolidated under Amenhotep III, ended not through invasion or rebellion, but in the quiet failure of a family's own biology to keep producing an heir who could carry it forward. What makes this discovery so unsettling isn't simply that it solved an old mystery. It's what the solving required us to understand differently. For a century, historians debated whether Akhenaten's strange, unforgettable image on those temple walls was theology, propaganda, or artistic experimentation. The DNA didn't settle every question about his art, and scholars continue to debate exactly how much of Amarna's style reflects literal physical reality versus religious symbolism. But it did something perhaps more important. It forced everyone studying this family to reckon with the human cost hidden behind 3,000 years of sacred tradition, a cost written not in the ink of scribes eager to flatter their king, but in the quiet, patient language of bone and blood, waiting inside a sealed tomb for the science that could finally translate it. Somewhere between a father who reshaped an empire's religion and a son who could barely stand without a cane, there's a very human story about a family that believed keeping its bloodline pure would protect its throne forever, never imagining that the very thing they were protecting would be the thing that